This is a homage beat.
Apologies were dealt out, but it just got me thinking on, because it's just, especially in our culture, like we always say, I put this on whatever the case is, I put it on whatever, and it's like, nah, my word should be enough. I put this on me, that I said it, that's I'm going to do it, or that's is true. But again, like I said, I think the conflict comes when somebody is opposing it.
It made me think of something how, especially like in now time, like how Google is on your phone.
Yeah.
Like somebody will say something, you like, nah, that ain't true.
Like
Google
fact
it.
check
You be
it.
like, Google it. Like we should be able to be like, oh, they said it. Like if they really like believe it, like why you gotta go back and check? Like unless you like, I know that ain't true, but like if they saying it, they really like Because my wife has got me like that. She said something, and I go Google it. I should be like, she'll get mad because she'll be right. I'm like,
I ain't believe it.
She'll get mad.
Nah,
so that's a little something.
Nah, that's real. But before we got on that, you were saying an example of you being unfaithful, and you gave the example of marriage, and that's the next point that I make. I say, it doesn't take long to realize people go back on their words. If we're honest, we all fail to follow through on things we promise. Whether it is showing up to an event we said we would attend, or breaking the promises of a wedding vow. I say many don't agree with this, but marriage is legally binding. Some believe that loving someone is enough, and that marriage is some government institution. For many, the legality and paperwork of marriage seems unnecessary. Now, have you ever heard that argument before, where people who are living together, they're like, I'm not getting married because all it is just me signing a piece of paper? Have you heard people like say that before?
Yeah, I've heard that like on both sides, like a person living with a person that say that's enough, we don't have to do this, like we don't need to really make that commitment to each other, because like you don't know what's gonna happen, or you got that person that totally shies away, that like I don't want to give them my freedom. I don't want to make that commitment because of what that's going to take from me. What am I going to lose? So I mean, I think a lot of I think that is something, because you're thinking about what you're going to lose, what you're going to lose when you make that type of commitment to another person.
Yeah, because it's like, I understand their point when they say that marriage is just a piece of paper. But that's the whole problem, is that you view marriage as, that's your understanding of marriage, when biblically speaking, marriage is what? A covenant, if we could say, and I probably jumped the gun a little bit, a commitment. It is a covenant, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we continue. But it's not just you signing on a dotted line, going and registering at the justice of the peace. It's more to it than that. It's a commitment that you're making with your spouse before God. That's what y'all doing. So but once you take God out of the equation, it's like, what's the point? There is no point of getting married if all I got to do is sign a contract.
That's really good work. I know, and I don't know if I'm getting all my facts super straight, but I know...
I'm about to Google it.
Yeah, Google that. But I know, historically, I think, I want to make sure I'm not butchering it, but I know they would jump the broom back in like, I'm not sure if it was like in slavery, when our people were enslaved back in the, years and years ago. I know that a lot of times they would use jumping the broom, and that would become a cultural thing that was culturally significant to different like African American culture, because you would jump the broom and that would signify that this man and this woman are now joined together, then sign a piece of paper. I mean, they weren't able to. They weren't allowed to read, write, and things like that. But like that was what showed. And at that point, you had to have something more than just a piece of paper to show that like we're together. Like, I mean, I understand the point of marriage contracts now. Like our culture now has to show that we gotta have that, because like now people are just getting up. Like you put these statistics that people are just leaving, and I mean different people, not to beat on people that choose to be divorced. I mean it's different situations that cause it to happen. But when you sit there and you make that commitment, I mean you have to. You do say in your commitment. Some people may have different vows, but like you're sticking to. When you say commitment, you're tying yourself to something. You're joining together.
Yeah, and so just that idea that if all your view of marriage is, I just really love this person and I just want to be with them, in your mind, there's no sense in just going and signing a piece of paper. But from a biblical lens, it's more than that.
Yeah.
You know, your marriage is to be a reflection of Christ and the church.
Yeah,
that this is a commitment. Yeah. This is a covenant that I'm promising to be with this person for the rest of my life, through the good, through the bad, no matter what it is. That it's more than just that. Now, granted, people will say, I'll do that. But it's like, no. Because just even if you take God out of the equation, I say this. I say those who feel this way are well-meaning but fail to realize the sacredness of marriage. Yeah. It's not sacred in a religious sense, but in a financial, medical, and biological sense. Mm-hmm. Spouses typically have financial interests in each other's cars or houses. These assets are not shared with a stranger. In the cases of emergencies, one typically has their spouse make life decisions for them. Mm-hmm. Also, when a couple comes together and make a child, they literally become one flesh. Marriage is about love, but it's also legally binding for those very reasons. Marriage is a promise or a commitment to stay with another person for the rest of their life. A promise of such magnitude is inherently legal. So these people who just live together, and it's like, okay, so whose name is on the car?
Yeah.
Whose name is on the house? When the other person gets sick, your spouse is the only one who can make decisions on you. If you're not married, that person is just Joe Blow. They don't mean nothing. There's no significance of it. And then when y'all have a kid, that's another legal matter in itself. Right. So marriage is inherently legal, even if you want to take God out of the equation. Yeah. But it's like, it's not just that. But when we were boil it down to just that, and we failed to see that, no, this is a commitment that we're literally becoming one flesh with this other person. That in and of itself is legally binding. Right there. And like I said, it's a covenant that we make with this other person. And because we devalue marriage so much, you were talking about it, like that because we view marriage this way, the statistics on divorce is crazy. Yeah. I say in America, there's one divorce approximately every 36 seconds, which is nearly 2,400 divorces per day. That average out to 876,000 divorces a year. That's crazy to think about, that people are making these commitments and not keeping them. And I say this, like you mentioned before, I don't want to mention this to be critical of people who are divorced, but to point out that it's common for people to break promises. Yeah. Because that's essentially what it is. Because even if you don't want to get married, you're promising to be with this other person. But it's like, if there's nothing legally binding, you can just dip. And then you can leave this other person high and dry. And again, I don't want to sound misogynistic, but a lot of times it's the woman who gets, the short end of the stick, that she may get left with the kids, or she may get left where she may not have the financial resources, or this, that, and the third. Or even if it's the other way around, it's like in divorces, not that I advocate it, there's some sort of what y'all came in here with, y'all leave with, instead of one person just taking everything and the other person not having it. But it's like, if there's no legality of it, the other person is screwed.
I don't think that's a misogynistic comment. I mean, just leaving, if you, not even just our culture, but I mean, just in America in general, you see a lot of that, where men we choose to just break those commitments, and we lack that accountability within ourselves to go and really stand to what we promised to do. Yeah. If we do leave our wives or women in our lives, and we leave them with the children, or we leave them feeling like maybe leaving them with the house or money is enough, but then you didn't just leave them with that. You left them with a lot of emotional baggage, a lot of scars on the inside that can affect them. Like, we don't see these breaking of commitments and promises. It doesn't just affect things that are just tangible. Yeah. It affects people mentally. It affects people in their functioning day-to-day lives. So these promises need commitments. We can't like you were saying earlier, you can't take it lightly that you're just making I promise you. Yeah, when you promise something, I promise my wife, or I promise somebody in my life something, that really means something. And if you're gonna break it, you need to come and you need to be accountable for what you're doing. So I mean, that's very significant.
Nah, and like I said, again, I don't want to knock anybody who has been through a divorce. I'm just simply making a point that all of us do not keep our words. Nobody keeps nobody keeps their word. And I say, however, the Bible accounts for one who always keeps promises and covenants. And this is why I said I used covenant too early. But the idea of covenant is the same kind of idea that a contract and treaty holds. It's simply, making a commitment or an agreement with two parties. And throughout Scripture, we see covenants that God makes, not just with other nations, but with people. We see this all throughout Scripture. We see that there's covenants that are conditional, while others are unconditional. And I just had this one question. Can you think of any covenants in Scripture? Now, you may not have to know the ins and outs of it, but are you familiar with any covenants that you see, that you've read or seen in Scripture?
I mean, I know God that made a covenant with Abraham and Noah, as you were talked about before you even got on the pod. I don't know the verbatim of that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna lean on your theological
and that's
strength,
cool.
So
that's cool, because the whole point that I'm making is that we see the paradigm of men who don't keep their covenant, but we see throughout Scripture God is a God who makes covenants, and He keeps His covenants with those He makes with them. And one of like I said, there's a covenant that God makes with Noah. There's a covenant God makes with Abraham. There's a covenant God makes with Moses. There's a covenant that God makes with David. Or the one with Moses is usually called the Mosaic Covenant, but it's pretty much for the whole country, nation of Israel. And then there's the new covenant that believers cling to. We talk about this this new covenant that's seen in the New Testament, but it's actually mentioned in the Old Testament. Jeremiah 31:31 is the big verse that people harp on as far as the new covenant goes. But we see in the covenants are pretty unique, where some of them are unconditional and some of them are conditional. Unconditional covenant means no matter what you do, I'm still going to be faithful to what I promised you. A good example is the Abrahamic covenant. The Abrahamic covenant is the covenant that God made with Abraham. And this covenant, God promised three things. He promised land, which is Israel. He promised that his descendants would be, I forget, as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand in the sea, or something to that effect, where he just have a lot of descendants. And then the other promise that God made with Abraham is that he would be a blessing to the other nations. Now, and I always think, when Abraham is getting this covenant, he's probably thinking, what are you talking about? Because he doesn't see the realities of these promises. It's his descendants who see the realities of these promises. And so you got to be thinking as Abraham, because he's just some nomad. I think he's from the city of Ur or something to that effect. And God tells him, I'm going to bring you to the land of Canaan. And Abraham's like, okay, whatever. He's not even just really thinking, but there was nothing Abraham could have done to have broken that covenant that God had made with him. On the flip side, there were what's called conditional covenants, where it's you do this and I'll bless you. You don't do this, I'm gonna curse you. It was the covenant that God had made with Moses. And again, just historical tidbits, so hopefully those listening don't lose me. I'll try to keep it brief. But it was called the Suzerain Vassal Treaty, and it was a common treaty in the ancient Near East. But the whole book of Deuteronomy is structured as this type of treaty. The treaty essentially identified two parties: the superior, the suzerain, which was God, and the inferior, the vassal, which was Israel. These treaties illustrated to the vassal how much the suzerain, God, has done to protect and establish the vassal, Israel, who therefore owes submission and allegiance to the suzerain. Essentially, the whole point that's being made is God is the one who brought Israel out of Egypt. He's done many mighty works. He's demonstrated himself to be faithful. He poured out the plagues on the Egyptians because Pharaoh did not let his people go. He brought them through the Red Sea. He took them through the wilderness, provided them water, provided them manna. All Israel was supposed to do was be faithful to this God who had promised these things to them.